those of you either who are of a certain age, or have a job like ours, or read spiritual books will know that the teacher named Ram Dass, or known as Ram Dass, died just before Christmas last year. He became a New Age spiritual guru, one person who brought a lot of Hinduism or yoga or Eastern practices to the West. But before he did all of that, and wrote books like Be Here Now or Grist for the Mill, had his professional life as a psychologist, as a professor of psychology back when his name was Richard Alpert in Harvard University in the early 1960s. And in one account of his life, he said that in the first big chapter of his professional life as a young man in his 20s, in the 1960s in Boston, he had what looked to be every single measure of professional success he could have. He was well paid. He was teaching psychology at Harvard University with side jobs at Stanford and Yale and Berkeley. He was making good money for the time, enough to have fancy clothes, an MG sports car. He was surrounded by the company of women that he was happy to be surrounded by. And he bought an airplane. That's what being a professor meant back then? I don't think you get to do that anymore. But he had all these measures of what he said were what the world would tell him professional success looked like. He's got a PhD. He walks around feeling comfortable with himself and the romantic company of people he wants to be in romantic company with. He's got a job at the most prestigious university environment in the world with money and parties, a staff, and students sitting in chairs waiting to hear what he has to say. And he said that none of it made him happy. Surprise, surprise, surprise. He said that the motorcycle he bought sat rusting in a garage somewhere. He did not have a pilot's license and couldn't fly the plane he had. He was lonely when he was in the company of students or staff or colleagues or the romantic partners he had. That, like most of us, he found himself feeling like a sham and wasn't happy. And into this life he was living walked a man named Timothy Leary, who many of you will know was a person who brought experimentation with psychedelics to Harvard and then to Harvard Divinity School, and then he and Ram Dass were asked to leave. Ram Dass, Richard Alpert's mom and dad, lived down the street from Timothy Leary. So one night, Richard Alpert at the time goes and has a party with Timothy Leary, and you can assume what a party with Timothy Leary looks like. And with what I imagine was a great deal of chemical assistance, had an experience in which he watched layers of himself fade away. Richard Alpert, still with that name, said that he was sitting in the corner of a room at a house in Boston, and he would watch visions of himself appear in the corner of the room and look at him and then disappear. He saw the professor image show up in professor's robes with a title and a PhD lecturing, and then that person would fade away. And he said to himself, I guess I don't need that person. And then he saw the cosmopolitan, good-looking, well-dressed ladies' man version of himself standing in the corner smoking a pipe, feeling good about himself, and that person began to fade away. He said, maybe I don't need that person. And then he had a crash course, assisted speed version of what many mystics and poets and seekers seek all their life to experience. Watching the person named Richard Alpert, his namesake, disappear in the corner. And then his body. And then in what practice meditators will tell you is a terrifying experience. Felt the very boundaries of his self begin to disappear and wondered if he would go away. Until he realized that during the entire time, somebody had been scared or noticing something When someone was disappearing, there was awareness watching someone disappearing, and he came to the conclusion that as long as there was an awareness, there was something in him that would never go away. And that did not depend on the titles, the roles, the success, the money, the PhD, the job, the clothes, the anything. That he was not those things. He leaves this experience feeling pretty liberated, walks to his parents' house a few houses down the street in the midst of a snowstorm, and decides that at 5 a.m. he's going to shovel their sidewalk and clear snow away. He's shoveling snow after having had this freeing experience, and his parents open their windows and say, "What are you thinking? It's 5 in the morning, it's cold, and you're shoveling snow." He said that he recognized in that moment that that external voice telling him what was appropriate and what wasn't, he had been listening to all his life. It occurred to him that there are no rules for when you can shovel snow. That there's no morality associated with it. And that there are no tests in life. At least not for the things that matter. So he said to himself, "I will shovel snow at 5 in the morning." And it occurs to me that in most real things in life, the tests, the rules, the limitations, the expectations that other people have set for me, I have accepted thoughtlessly and will stop doing today. He went on to teach this lesson of no test pretty commonly and regularly in his teachings. It made me think of the young woman in the poem, in the fish. And it reminded me that often when we're trying to be free and to remember that there really are no tests, to be free, to remember that often we have to toss back the very thing that the rest of the world has been trying to catch for a long, long time. The very thing that everyone we know, all of our colleagues, all of our friends have been chasing after as the vision of success. We pull it up out of the water and recognize that a million other people have been trying to catch it, but it's not the prize. And to toss it back. Think of all of the messages about what the actual prize are. The prizes are what you're supposed to be looking after in your life. Money, good looks, professional competency, praise from other people. Just think. I'm sure there's a list of tests that you can identify that you listen to and abide by right now. And by definition, the fact that most other people are chasing after it probably should be evidence that it's not the prize. And yet, what do? Chase after that same prize over and over and over. And the inertia behind those prizes, the inertia behind the expectations of how things are supposed to be and who you're supposed to love, how you're supposed to do your job, what the values of your family or your church or your office are, that inertia is so strong that it makes the people who question those things look like the weirdos instead of the people who follow the bad rules. Test out these changes in your life. Just try changing the font in the order of service. Just a little thing, and see how much people like change. And then after you're done doing that, go to your friends and family and tell them, the very values that you've been basing your life on, I'm beginning to question, and will search after a different meaning of success, truth, and wisdom. See if they like it. Tell them that you do not love the person that they think you're supposed to love. Or that you love a person they say you are not supposed to love. Tell them you're going to quit your job, the one that they love that you have. Tell them you're going to drop out of school. Tell them you're moving. You're changing churches. That you're giving everything you own away. And see how it goes. The inertia behind the tests that people set for us is strong. And in your life, the saboteurs are, by definition, already on the boat with you. That's just how it works. And sometimes you're the saboteur for somebody else, not celebrating their change in growth and understanding of success or the prize. But most good religion, if you get to the kernel of it, most good religion is about questioning the very tests of success and value and love and morality that the systems you're in are holding up. Look at the Jesus story. A person who, in the midst of the most powerful, wealthy country and empire in the history of the world during his time, said, "Blessed are the poor. Blessed are you who suffer." I would like to find the sickest, poorest, most outcast people I can, hang out with them, and say that that's where God lives. That message is so radical, and yet it gets wrapped in the American flag and prosperity gospel and power day after day on cable news and movies and TV, and even people like us who lift him up would be quite dismissive, I think, of most of his messages about what matters. I think it would be troubling for me to ask the person in the Jesus narrative what he thinks about how I spend my time, in work or personally. Blessed are the poor? I'm supposed to be making money. Blessed are those who suffer? I have no idea what you're talking about. Look at the narrative of the Buddha. This young man who, by all accounts, much like Ram Dass in his early life, except to the extreme, is surrounded by opulence and success and comfort and safety. He's a prince, with all of the vices and pleasures given to him on a silver platter, and yet his liberation comes from leaving that environment and becoming directly acquainted with death and old age and sickness. You want to talk about the three things that our culture says mean you are losing. Because if you want to win in America, you never get old, you've never been sick. If you are, you can pay for it. And you certainly don't die. And he says that true liberation comes from directly facing old age, sickness, and death, and realizing that your grasping toward gain or loss is ultimately the cause of your suffering, and to give up non-attachment to all of those things will be the only freeing environment. Try passing that along in an election as your platform. There was a theologian named Paul Tillich, and he said in the mid-20th century that for theological liberals, we should think of God as the object of our ultimate concern. His idea being, it really didn't matter if there is a God or not, it matters what you treat like God. And so the goal of religion is to have your ultimate concern be things that are worthy of being ultimately concerned with. That we treat things like God all the time. My ego, money, power, success, other people's opinions. We can stop talking about me and start talking about other people now. But think of all the things we lift up that are ultimately treated like our ultimate concern that just don't deserve it. To Tillich's point, the church, if it exists for any reason at all, should exist to have you be ultimately concerned with things that are ultimately concerning and very little else. Very little else. That you should question all of the tests that people hand you, all of the rules, and anybody who tells you that they know how the test is supposed to go, including us. Any church, any political party, any philosophical system, any family, any romantic partner, any minister that tells you they are the prize isn't right. This place is not the prize. This place exists so that you can be freed from illusion to pursue the prize. But this place is not the prize. It is not the end goal. And I'll leave Beth out of this. I don't know what I'm talking about. it is still fantastically amazing to me that for some reason it's okay to stand up here and talk for 20 minutes every couple of weeks and you listen. I've got no idea. Just trying the best we can. But what I do know is that the things I have pretended and believed were ultimately concerning weren't. That I have failed the tests that the world told me I was supposed to have, and I've tried to succeed with them, and most of them were utter nonsense. That for the real things in life, there really are no tests. But be careful what you ask for, because if you do discover what is worthy of your ultimate concern, then you have to know. And then everything else stands out. It's like in that poem that we read from E.E. Cummings this morning, in which he contrasts the love that matters with playing with toys that break. And he says to his romantic interest, I bet you are tired of playing with toys that break, and so am I. Let's do something different together. I bet instead of playing with toys that break, we can love in a way that holds the moon in the sky. So put down breakable things. That is the whole point of this endeavor. The reason the church exists at all, to identify things that are sturdy and things that break, and to leave the breakable things aside and only focus on the sturdy, good, eternal, strong realities. But so often we do not pressure test to find out what breaks because we're scared we might find out. I'm scared if I pressure test this relationship, I might find out we're not supposed to be in it. I'm scared that if I pressure test whether this is actually my career trajectory, I find out I'm supposed to do something else. I'm afraid my friendships are more fragile than I thought they were. I'm afraid they're gossiping about you at the office. They are. Knowing that something, admitting that something is fragile or strong does not make it fragile or strong. If your marriage or your friendships or your job were fragile, they were fragile before you knew it. And will be so whether you admit it or not. Breakable things do not depend on you calling them breakable to be so. And strong things will be strong whether you know it or not. To know the difference between breakable things and strong things, we do have to pressure test, and that means questioning every single test of success that anyone has ever handed you. Most especially the things people praise you for. If you get praised for your competence and the good job that you do, ask whether that is the prize in life. If people praise you for your intelligence, ask what would happen if it went away. Who would be there with me and for me? If it's your health or your good looks or your bank account or your address or your competence or whatever it is that the world tells you is special about you, ask what would happen if it went away and who would still be by my side. And you will start to know which things are fragile and which things aren't. And if you don't ask those questions, you are not living your life. You are living a life that someone else has handed to you, and a God that someone else has handed to you, and tests of your competence and success that someone else has handed to you. And it's nobody else's life. And I promise you that the more you practice getting really close to the things that truly matter, the sturdy things, the ultimate concern things, once you recognize that there are no tests, then you're going to be very impatient with anything that doesn't matter, and anyone who pretends to think they know. Anyone whose petty tests in your family or your relationship or your office to see who matters and who doesn't, it doesn't matter. Most things don't. And just so we don't get self-righteous, if you begin to think that everyone else you've ever met is petty but you're not, it's worth some exploration. I speak from experience. If it's working, you will begin to feel just as impatient with the parts of yourself that play with breakable things. But let me tell you, it's the only game in town. It's the only game worth playing, finding things that don't break and paying attention to only that. It's the only thing worth doing. And one of the primary reasons that a church like this exists. It should show up in daily, tangible ways in your life. Maybe you're not shoveling snow at 5 in the morning and feeling liberated by it. But you should start to notice that other people's petty, small expectations and tests are not affecting you as much anymore. If this is not producing joy in you, even in the hard times, in some way, it's not working. If you find yourself surrounded by a group of people who tell you they got the answer and they're sad and angry, probably not working. The company you surround yourself with, the relationships that you form are going to be critical in learning to play with things that don't break. It's the difference between someone in your life saying, something's changed about you, or something has changed about you. Someone who says, I celebrate the fact that you're questioning what's worthy in your life or not. Invest in those kind of people. In people who don't want you playing with breakable things. Who celebrate your growth. Who celebrate you questioning the tests that others put on you and who are willing to do the same. These past few months in church have been filled with more memorial services in a few weeks than I can remember. If anything does stand out to me that I feel I know for certain is that this life is so short. Even if you live a long one, it's so short. And that the people who have regrets at the end of it are those who played by other people's rules and worshiped gods that other people told them to worship and kept trying to pass tests that were silly to begin with. This is the only life you have. Find out what breaks and what doesn't. Love who is worthy of your love no matter what anybody else says. Follow the path of who you are called to be and supposed to be, no matter if it passes a silly test or not. Speak truth to yourself and others, and when you find something that is truly worthy of your love and ultimate concern, say yes and hold on for dear life. It's the only thing that matters. So that you might have life and have it in abundance. May it be so, and amen.